Hello, everyone. Really a pleasure for me to be here today. My name is Leroy Chiao, and I'm an astronaut. During my 15-year NASA career, I had the good fortune to fly 4 times into space. My first 3 missions were aboard space shuttles, and on my 4th mission, I trained with the Russians. I launched out of the Baikonur Cosmodrome and flew to the International Space Station, where I served as the commander of the station for a 6.5-month flight. So I was thrilled and honored to be asked to come here to CIW. And I started thinking about, okay, they said, we want you to tell us how to work like an astronaut. And I thought, okay, well, what does that mean? What are the fundamentals? Well, it's hard work, it's focus, keeping the big picture, and being able to reprioritize on the fly. But then I thought, well, wait a minute, those principles apply pretty much to any demanding job, whether you're commanding a spacecraft or whether you're waiting tables at a busy restaurant. And I'm serious about that. I have more than once remarked that if you are able to work a busy restaurant, you actually have the foundation of becoming a very good instrument pilot. So I thought the best thing I could do is tell you about my personal story and how growing up in 2 different cultures simultaneously helped to, I think, differentiate me and help me to better understand and better appreciate the differences between us, which I think allowed me to help build better and more effective teams. So I can't remember a time when I wasn't interested in airplanes and flying and rockets, which is kind of odd because nobody else in my family has any interest in any of that. The only connection is an uncle of my mom's was actually trained by the Americans to fly during World War II, and he went on to fly bombers against the Japanese on the Chinese mainland. I was born in the US, and I grew up during the Cold War, during the very beginning of the so-called space race. And unfortunately, I never did have a chance to meet that uncle. He did actually survive the war, flew many bombing missions, survived the war, and then he was tragically killed in an air accident doing a demonstration flight for a reporter. Eyewitnesses said that he was seen looking back, yelling at the passenger, who apparently had freaked out and had grabbed the stick and caused them to go into a dive. My parents immigrated to the United States, and they very intentionally chose to live in mainstream neighborhoods because they wanted us to assimilate into the mainstream American culture. And I absolutely believe that was the right thing to do. However, as the one kid that looked different, and by the way, the one kid that was physically smaller than the other kids, this wasn't always such a good thing for me. And as I got into middle school, things didn't really get any better. So, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I threw myself into my studies, learned how to deal with different situations, and I was really fascinated, really threw myself into my passion for space. And as LZ was talking about Apollo 8, this is probably the most incredible photograph ever taken from space, in my opinion, and really captures the humanity and just what we're all about. And it really inspired me to think about wanting to become an astronaut myself. Later on, a few years later, actually 1 year later, watching Apollo 11 land on the moon. I remember watching that old black and white TV set. Some of you here might be old enough to remember what a black and white TV set is. But I remember watching the scene in the Mission Control Center unfold and listening to the transmissions coming back from the moon as Apollo 11's lunar module approached the surface and then actually landed. Hours later, watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin take the very first steps of any human beings on another planetary body kind of sealed the deal for me. I knew that I wanted to become an astronaut. Now, growing up in 2 different cultures, it let me kind of see where a lot of times the cultures clash, and it kind of let me see how different viewpoints of the same thing can exist. And I guess that's kind of my crude attempt at philosophy. But it gave me an understanding that, things don't always fit together, and sometimes you have to make things, make choices. You have to understand the other members of your team, what motivates them, why they might have a different viewpoint or understand things differently. And I think that's the key to effective communication and building effective teams. Just one small example in the Asian culture, you do not blow your own horn. The idea is you work hard, you keep your head down, you wait to get recognized, and move ahead. And as you all know, as we all know, that really doesn't work too well in Western culture. And I would venture to say that if I hadn't consciously made an effort to break out of that way of thinking and that way of operating, I probably would not have made it to becoming an astronaut. By the way, I put this photo up for a little bit of comic relief. This is 20-something years ago and 20-something pounds ago. I joined the 13th astronaut group at NASA. This was a very exciting time. We came from all different walks of life. There were research engineers like me, military test pilots from the different services. We had a couple of medical doctors and a couple of physicists. We were different genders. We came different races, coming from all kinds of different backgrounds. We all came together and started getting to know each other and working together at NASA. And it doesn't matter if you're putting together a space crew or a crew to work the Mission Control Center or a crew to work in the boardroom. As you all know, it's the people that are going to make or break you, right? And understanding the differences, we're all different. We come from different backgrounds, and I think that is really the key to effective communication and the effective way for a leader to figure out how to build a cohesive team out of all these different individuals. Understanding these differences and applying it is what's going to make you successful in your business. I trained and flew all of my missions actually with international astronauts and or women as well, so all mixed crews. My first mission to space, 4 years after I came to NASA, I realized that boyhood dream, getting to go fly aboard Space Shuttle Columbia. We were the second international microgravity laboratory, which means in the back of the payload bay, we actually had a laboratory module called Space Lab, and these were the days before we had an international space station, so this is the main way we did research. But we worked on experiments from around the world. We traveled around all over Europe, Canada, Japan to meet these scientists and train with them, figure out what they were trying to do, and at the end of this mission, we had actually accomplished over 80 different scientific investigations. Upon returning, I pretty quickly got turned around onto my second mission aboard Space Shuttle Endeavour, and the main purpose of this flight was to use the robotic arm to retrieve a Japanese satellite. But the biggest deal for me, personally, was my first chance to put the big white spacesuit on and go outside and lead my first 2 spacewalks. This was really quite a thrill, and what we were doing, we were testing tools and construction techniques that we would later use to build the International Space Station. On my third mission aboard Space Shuttle Discovery, I got to put some of that into practice. We were the second major assembly mission of the station. We brought 2 pieces with us in the back of the payload bay. We went up to the space station, which back then was pretty small still. We used the robotic arm to position those 2 pieces, and then over 4 spacewalks and 2 teams, we went outside and bolted those pieces into place and mated the electrical connectors to bring them all to life. After the landing of Space Shuttle Discovery, somehow 10 years had gone by. I'd flown 3 space shuttle missions, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next when the chief asked me to join the Expedition Corps. Now, this was quite a change. Up until that point, my career had been geared towards figuring out how we're going to do all the spacewalks, helping to develop the tools, and figuring out how we're going to split up the missions and how it was all going to work together to build this most audacious construction project that we've ever done in space. Now I was being asked to shift gears. I was still going to be a flyer, but no longer would I be flying 2-week shuttle missions. I was being asked to train to live and work aboard the station on what turned out to be a 6.5-month flight. So the first thing I had to do was wrap my head around, did I want to live in space for 6.5 months, basically in a series of tin cans? You know, that's seriously not for everyone. Once I did, I took a couple of days for that, I really did, and once I decided I did want that challenge, the bigger challenge was the training. It was a 3.5-year training flow. I was going to have to spend half of my time in Russia, basically 1 month in Star City, 1 month in Houston, back and forth for 3.5 years. I was going to have to learn the Russian language to pretty much a fluent level because I was going to operate as the co-pilot of a Russian Soyuz, and I had to train half my time over there with instructors that didn't speak English. Now, the cosmonauts had to do the same thing. They had to learn English. They had to spend half their time in Houston training with our specialists, and at the end of the day, we all decided it was a very worthwhile thing. But the biggest takeaway for me from this training and this mission was not the flight itself. The flight itself was fantastic, but really what surprised me was this experience of living in another culture, really broadening my perspectives. I had to learn a lot of traditions. Some traditions are a little tougher than others. Some are more subtle. What's wrong with this picture? Well, in the West, nothing. In Russia, you never shake hands over a threshold. Somehow it's bad luck for both of you. And the Americans, when we first got there and we tried to shake someone's hand over a threshold, the Russian would quickly jump inside, and so it wouldn't be bad luck for either of you. Nobody could really explain to me why it was bad luck. It just was. Also, speaking of luck, you don't wish each other good luck in Russia. This is very bad luck. You're jinxing someone, right? You don't wish someone a good flight or a good mission. You certainly don't if you know that someone you know is expecting a child. You certainly don't congratulate them. You don't wish them good luck. And you don't give them a baby shower. You don't give them a gift until the baby is born and everyone is healthy. Now, these seem like small things, and they are, but if you make that effort to understand the culture that you're in, they will appreciate it, and it'll be a more positive experience and give you that edge in moving along. This is my home away from home. This is Star City. I guarantee you this looks nothing like the Johnson Space Center out in Houston. I can also guarantee you that there are no statues of me at the Johnson Space Center or any of my colleagues. This is the Russian Mission Control Center. Now, what do you see here that you will never see in Houston? Anybody see it? Advertising, right. And the funny thing is, most of those companies are Western. Expedition 10 was the mission we flew. We launched aboard a Russian Soyuz. Salzhan Sharipov was my crewmate. At the time, he was the youngest full colonel in the Russian Air Force, but interestingly, his background, he's an Uzbek who was born and raised in Kyrgyzia. So just a piece of trivia, he and I actually comprised the first all-Asian heritage crew in space. So we trained together for 3.5 years. We got to go fly. Launching out of the Baikonur Cosmodrome was quite an interesting experience after having flown on 3 shuttles. The main purpose of the station is scientific research, so we did as much investigation as we could. But the main purpose of our series of flights was keeping the station in a state of good repair until we could get the shuttle flying again and resume major construction. We were flying only 1.5 years after the Space Shuttle Columbia accident. I got to do 2 Russian spacewalks. This was a real treat because I'd become a specialist in doing spacewalks using American suits and American tools. And this was a chance to go out and further space station construction by installing navigation antennas, as well as installing and retrieving experiment packages. I'd be remiss if I didn't show you some pictures of the Earth. This is looking over the Himalaya Mountains into China. And from our perch about 300 miles up, the Himalayas look pretty small, but just remember, buried down in there somewhere is Mount Everest. This is Mecca, Saudi Arabia. The white spot in the middle, that's the Grand Mosque. This is Beijing, the capital of China. The rectangle in the middle is the Forbidden City where the old emperors used to live. This is Seoul, South Korea at night. This is Manhattan, New York City. This is the southern tip of Florida, a very beautiful part of the world. Blues and greens are really spectacular here. Glaciers in Patagonia, South America. Sometimes Mother Nature's just funny. I saw this in January, grabbed the camera, had the perfect thing to send to my wife for Valentine's Day. It's been kind of hard to top ever since, though. Here's some kind of artistic photos. This is an area in the Ukraine. My chemical engineering background tells me this is some kind of an evaporative recovery pond. The green suggesting some kind of a copper solution. No doubt an environmental nightmare, but it made for a pretty picture. This is one of my favorites. This is Lake Nasser in Egypt. I managed to capture this just as the sunlight was reflecting perfectly off the surface of the water into the lens, making it light up and look just like this out the window just for a second. Well, it's finally 6.5 months were about coming to an end. It was time to put our suits back on, and the Russian Mission Control Center wanted to make sure they still fit, because in space, in the absence of gravity, your spine relaxes. You actually get 1 to 1.5 inches taller. Now, before you get too excited about that, well, they have to accommodate for that when they build the suit. But before you get too excited about being taller, within about an hour of being on the ground, you're pretty much back to your normal height. We landed with a thump on the steppes of Kazakhstan. Under the parachute canopy, you're still coming down at about 25 feet per second. We do have soft landing rockets that fire, and the seats stroke against the piston, and seat liners are individually molded to spread the load out. So when all that works, you hit pretty hard, but it doesn't really hurt. The rescue forces are right on top of us, had us out in about 20 minutes, set us up in lawn chairs, handed us satellite phones so we could call our families to let them know that we were safe. After a quick ceremony in Kazakhstan, they put us back on the airplane, flew us back to Star City. We were reunited with our families and our loved ones. And the message here, just to kind of wrap it up, is that, the world really is shrinking. I mean, it's a cliche, but it's really true. And it's technology, as you heard in some of the previous talks, that is doing it. Email became widespread, and that really started connecting us. And then cell phones, mobile phones, became inexpensive enough that everyone could own one. Now we have smartphones, and this is more the norm than anything. And I have to agree with the Christian that I'd like to see less of this. With the advent of modern air travel, you can get almost anywhere in the world overnight, or at least, maybe by the following afternoon. And so my point is, the world really is shrinking, and it really is connected, and understanding those differences really has become much more important for you to be successful. You've got to keep an open mind. More and more young people are doing this to me, and who knows, maybe in a few years, this is how we're all going to greet each other in the business world. Finally, this is the photo I want to leave you with. This, of course, is the moon. I shot this with the long lens from the space station. On the left, Mother Earth, home planet to all of us. This is, this picture to me says dreams, and that's really what it's all about. And I hope that by giving you my perspective of growing up in two cultures, maybe that's inspired you to think a little bit about things that you might do to help be a more effective communicator and build more effective teams. Thank you.